Today's topic is eye contact. Let's get started. In the last video in this series, we learned helpful tips and tricks for using good body language while presenting. We talked about things like posture, hand placement, and facial expressions. Another important aspect of body language when we present is eye contact. So, what is eye contact? When we make eye contact, we look other people in the eyes while we speak. For example, if I talk like this, I am making eye contact. But if I talk like this, I am not making eye contact. Do you think eye contact is important? Why or why not? How do you feel when you're talking to someone and they do not make eye contact with you? How do you feel when you are watching a presentation and they do not make eye contact with you? Eye contact is important because it shows the audience that you are confident and prepared. It also helps keep the audience from losing focus or losing interest because you are looking at them and talking to them in a more personal way. Today, let's talk about 5 helpful tips for using good eye contact during presentations. Tip number 1, be prepared. Preparing for your presentation is important for many reasons, as we will learn throughout this series. One reason why it is so important to prepare is because if we are unprepared, we will not make very good eye contact. If you are looking at your notes or reading a script because you did not prepare, it will have a negative effect on your presentation. Prepare and practice for your presentation so you are able to focus on not just what you are saying, but how you are saying it and how you are connecting with the audience. Preparing well means you can make eye contact with your audience in a meaningful way. It's okay to use note cards, but try to look at the audience about 90% of the time. Tip number 2, keep eye contact with each person for about 3 to 5 seconds. When you are presenting, keep eye contact long enough to make a connection and then move on. This means that you should not look at one person for a long time. It's uncomfortable, right? It's important to note that you do not have to make eye contact with every person in the room, but when you do make eye contact, make sure it's just for about 3 to 5 seconds and not for too long. Tip number 3, talk to everyone in the audience, not just the people you know or are comfortable with. See the audience as individual listeners. When you make eye contact, make sure you don't just make eye contact with your friends or your teacher or the people you know well. Try to connect with the whole audience. This means you should make eye contact all around the room as you present. Tip number 4, don't do the sprinkler. It can be a little stressful to look at people when we present, and that can make us do things that don't look very natural. If you feel nervous making eye contact when you present, remember this tip. Do not look around the room too evenly left to right, like a sprinkler, right? We don't normally talk like that, right? Look at all sections of the room at random. Maybe this means looking to the left, then the middle, then the left again, then the right, then the people in the back, and so on. Just don't do this. This does not look natural, right? So look at random parts of the room. Tip number 5. When you're thinking of what to say, look at the space between people. Don't worry, you don't have to look people in the eyes for every single moment of your presentation. For example, it's okay to look at your notes from time to time. If you're thinking of what to say next, or need a little break from looking at everyone because it's making you a little uncomfortable, you can look at the space between people. This way, you're still looking out at the audience, but have a moment to think clearly without looking into someone's eyes. It can help reduce your stress too if you're feeling a little anxious. Remember, be prepared. Keep eye contact with each person for 3 to 5 seconds. Talk to everyone. Don't do the sprinkler. And look at the space between people when you're thinking of what to say next. These eye contact tips will help you give a better presentation. Okay, students, that's it for today's video on how to use good eye contact in your presentation. Today's topic is gestures. Let's get started. Let's begin with a simple question. What are gestures? Gestures are the motions and movements we make with our hands when we speak. Gestures are very important in presentations for many reasons. First, gestures help keep the audience focused and interested. Can you imagine watching a presentation with no gestures? Second, gestures can help increase the audience's understanding of what we're talking about. Using gestures can help us show what we're talking about. And third, gestures add emphasis and help us to express what the most important ideas are in our speech. Let's consider the different types of gestures we can use. We can use gestures to express actions, emphasize adjectives, and to illustrate what we're saying. First, we can use gestures to express actions. I'm going to use some gestures. See if you can guess which action I'm expressing. Number 1. My friend and I were for hours yesterday. Number 2. I was for so long yesterday, my hands hurt. Number 3. I've been practicing lately. Did you understand what the gestures were? Number 1 was talking on the phone. Number 2 was typing. And number 3 was playing the guitar. Like we see in these examples, we can use gestures to express actions and help the audience understand what we're talking about. Second, we can use gestures to emphasize adjectives. Again, I'm going to use some gestures and see if you can guess which adjective I'm emphasizing. Number 1. My brother is really... Number 2. I have a very favor to ask you. Number 3. Yesterday I ate a really watermelon. Did you guess what the gestures were? Number 1 was tall. Number 2 was small. And number 3 was big. We can use gestures to emphasize adjectives, especially when we use words like really, very, and so. Really tall, very small, really big. Third, we can use gestures to illustrate what we're saying. Let's look at some examples. First, we can use gestures to illustrate what number point we're talking about. For instance, first, second, third. We can also use gestures that are more natural to our speaking, like when we're speaking and are expressing an idea that will continue or keep going, when we want to express disbelief, or when we want to illustrate an important point. These gestures are often part of our natural speaking and can be very effective in presentations as well. Now that we've gone over different types of gestures, let's learn 3 of the most important tips for using gestures during a presentation. Tip number 1, make gestures slowly and clearly. It's important to make your gestures slowly and clearly to emphasize your point. Don't gesture really quickly or suddenly, or it will distract your audience. Tip number 2, be natural. It's important to use natural gestures that you would use if you were talking to, say, a friend. Being natural means that you should use gestures while you speak. Don't pause to do gestures like this. I ate a really big watermelon. Don't do that. Instead, use gestures while you speak like this. I ate a really big watermelon. Another part of using natural gestures is keeping your hands fairly close to your body. We don't often make big gestures, so keep it natural. It's okay to use very big gestures, and sometimes presenters will do it to be funny, but normally you can follow the rule of keeping your hands in your personal space. Tip number 3, don't overuse gestures. Use them only to express important ideas. Some people have a tendency to use too many gestures. Let's consider our last example. I ate a really big watermelon. Here it is with normal gestures. I ate a really big watermelon. Now, here it is with too many gestures. I ate a really big watermelon. That is too many gestures. Make sure to only use gestures naturally and to express important words or ideas. Finally, let's look at an example of what to do and what not to do with gestures. Example number 1. The other day, I called up my good friend and invited her to go to the park. We went together and had a big picnic. It was great. Was that a good example or a bad one? That was an example of using bad gestures. I used too many gestures. I paused or stopped speaking when I did my gestures, and my gestures were too big and unnatural. This is an example of what not to do. Let's look at example number 2. Example number 2. The other day, I called up my good friend and invited her to go to the park. We went there together and had a big picnic. It was great. This was an example of good gestures. I used gestures only to emphasize important words and ideas. I did my gestures while I spoke, and the gestures were natural and in my personal space. These small changes make a big difference. So remember, make gestures slowly and clearly, be natural, and don't overuse gestures. Okay, students, that's it for today's video on how to use good gestures in your presentation. Today's topic is body language. Let's get started. Often when we talk about language, we mean the words we say. However, there's another way that we speak, and that is with our bodies. For example, we can tell by someone's body language if they are nervous, sad, or confident. Let's look at 2 examples of body language and see if we can guess how the person is feeling. Number 1, look at the woman in the picture. How do you think she's feeling? She is looking down, her hands are crossed in front of her, her shoulders are slouched, and she is frowning. We can tell just by her body language that she is feeling nervous or worried. Number 2, how about the woman in this picture? She is smiling, she is standing up straight, her arms are open, and she is making eye contact while she is speaking. We can see from her body language that she is feeling confident. Body language is very important when we give presentations. Our body language can make the difference between a presentation people want to watch and a presentation people are not so interested in watching. Let's talk about what to do and what not to do with our body language when we present. We will talk about the 5 most important body language tips. Tip number 1, stand up straight. Posture is the first thing people will see when you walk out to present. Make sure your feet are firmly planted on the ground, about shoulder width apart. Imagine there is a string on top of your head and there is someone pulling it up toward the sky. Make sure your shoulders are back and your head is held high. Tip number 2, don't lean or sway. Leaning on something or swaying back and forth is a clear sign to the audience that you are nervous, or maybe you even don't care much about what you are saying. Though it is okay to walk around and move while you present, make sure you don't shift your weight from foot to foot and don't lean on anything while you are presenting. Tip number 3, be mindful of your hands. Our hands can be the hardest things to control when we feel nervous. If you do not have a script or note cards, you can hold your hands here at about waist level, or you can hold on to a podium if you have one. This allows you to gesture easily, which we'll talk about more in a future video, and also to keep your hands from fidgeting or distracting the audience. Do not hold your hands straight by your side. This is not natural and it makes you look uncomfortable, right? Tip number 4, be mindful of your breath. This is a tip that can help you to manage your anxiety or nervousness. Often when we're nervous, we breathe faster because our hearts are racing. Try to purposefully take deep breaths before you present and while you present. This will help to reduce your anxiety. It also helps to practice and prepare for your presentation, which we'll talk about later in this series. Tip number 5, smile. A lot of emotion is shown on our face. Even if you are not really feeling very happy, smiling is a great way to connect with the audience and show them that you feel confident and comfortable. Whatever you do, don't frown or look unhappy. Now that we've learned these 5 tips, let's look at an example of good body language and bad body language. Example number 1. Hi, my name is Sarah, and today I'm going to talk about learning another language. I can't wait to tell you all about it. Example number 2. Hello everyone, my name is Sarah, and today I'm going to tell you all about learning another language. I can't wait to tell you all about it. Which one was an example of a good presentation? Example number 1 was an example of bad body language. I was slouching, swaying, fidgeting my hands, and looked very unhappy. That was an example of what not to do. Example number 2 was an example of good body language. I stood up straight and did not sway. I held my hands in a comfortable place and smiled while I spoke. These small changes made a big difference, didn't they? Remember, stand up straight, don't lean or sway, be mindful of your hands, be mindful of your breath, and smile. These body language tips will help you give a better presentation. Okay, students, that's it for today's video on how to use good body language in your presentation.